Hello, everybody. Welcome to News for the Soul. This is Daniel Brinkley.
This is Nicole Whitney, News for the Soul, life-changing talk radio from the uplifting to the unexplained.
Okay, everybody, take a deep breath. We know that we choose to come to this world, and we're chosen to come to this world, and we've come for breath. We breathe in for ourselves and out for spiritual unfoldment. And as we breathe these moments, let's open up our heart and open up our souls, and let the true awareness of News for the Soul make its impact now and forever.
We, Nicole, talked a few weeks ago about the nature of reality, and I was talking about the silence between the thoughts is who we really are, and here's Credo talking about the silent cave, the golden cave, where he goes to see beyond what most people can see. It's wherever you go, you have this universal recurring theme. Well, why wouldn't it be when it's the truth?
Whole nations are being decimated in front of you. Open your eyes. Do not let the children of the reptile to blinden you with their venom. Open your eyes. That's all I can say. There is hope. We can win, but open your eyes, please.
Credo, how are you?
I'm all right, sir, and you?
Yeah, not bad. Rushed off my feet, but okay.
For the first time on News for the Soul, together, David Icke, who you've heard before, the man who's known as the most controversial speaker from the world, speaking to us from his home in the UK, and Zulu shaman leader Credo Mutwa, speaking to us from his home in South Africa. This is the one you've been looking forward to. Let's get started. The two of you spent about 10 days together recently in South Africa, I understand, and that's what we want to talk about, these adventures that you had together and the teachings that came out of them. So, David, do you want to start and kind of encapsulate what happened?
Yeah, well, I want to do a lot less talking than Credo, because the world outside of Africa has not heard enough of this man. The word great is thrown around like confetti to so many people that don't merit the word. But as soon as I met Credo Mutwa in 1997, first of all, and then 98 again, it was clear that this was just a remarkable man. And the more that I listened to him, and the more that I understood about African history, which is a tiny, tiny infinitesimal fraction of what this man knows, it was clear that the world has made a big mistake by not listening and looking at Africa. Because this is not just an amazing continent, it is the home of a stream of knowledge that could benefit all of us to know. And so often, when people talk about esoteric stuff and ancient knowledge, they're looking at, the Middle East, they're looking at Native Americans and what have you. But so often, the knowledge of Africa is the one that's missed. And this is why I was so keen to get Credo on this program, so that people could understand that this is a continent and a stream of knowledge that they really do have to look at. I'll just say this very quickly, that the thing that becomes clear when you look at the way the ancient African knowledge does things in terms of ritual, in terms of the way it sees the world, it's very clear that once upon a time there was a global knowledge which then went off in different directions as the global society became fragmented. And this knowledge manifested in different ways under different names, but actually it's the same basic knowledge. When Credo threw the bones for me a few weeks ago, and was so stunningly accurate, it was unbelievable. And he can talk about the nature of that. It was the same basic phenomenon of physics that you find with tarot cards, with rune stones, and with other ways of reading the energy field all over the world. But it is the same knowledge which just manifests in different ways. And Africa is just such an untapped library. And outside of Africa, far too often, so is Credo Mutwa.
Well, it's interesting. I've heard many things about you, Credo, before, and actually another one of my regular guests here on the show comes to visit you, I understand, quite often as well, John Kehoe from the Mind Power teachings, and speaks very highly of you. So I really want to welcome you to News for the Soul, and I'm excited about capturing and putting forward some of these gems of wisdom that you are here to provide for us today. So welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can you hear me all right, Credo?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Okay. I can barely hear you, so I'm going to try to pull up your signal here, but if you can get real close to your phone for me, that would be really good too. So where does this start? What is it that the Western culture is forgetting or disconnected from?
The thing, ma'am, is in the culture of the West, there was at one time, I think it was in Victorian times, when people started denying anything outside of what they can see, what they can touch, and what they think they can hear. There was a denial of God, a ridiculing of all kinds of things. People didn't think about that this world we are in is incredible, unbelievable, and it is more incredible than we think it is.
So how is it that we've gotten away from that? How did we lose that?
Ma'am, when we became industrialized, when people started talking about conquering nature, where our ancestors lived with nature and were part of nature. And when we started, man, ridiculing things that appeared on the surface, for example, when people came to Africa, they saw many Africans wearing skins, and they said, Almighty God, what a bunch of savages these are. They did not understand that the reason why Africans wore skins in parts of Africa was because of animals. When you live in harmony with animals, or when you want to, you have to become like them, to know their habits, and sometimes to smell like them. When a man comes into an animal area smelling like an animal, the animals don't feel threatened at all. Whereas if a person comes to an African environment where there are animals like the black rhinoceros smelling like a twice divorced filling star, the rhinoceros feels very threatened, becomes very aggressive, man, and can even kill the person who smells of pomade and other modern cosmetics.
So it's really nature that's the connecting factor, you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. Human beings have tried to reject nature, like errant children running away from their grandmothers or mothers, and today we are paying the price.
So based on your culture and what you know that's been passed on, what is it that is, like, what is the true nature of our world then and our reality? What's really possible?
Honorable lady, the world that we live in is a mystery within a mystery, a puzzle within a puzzle. The world that we live in is many-faceted, like a diamond on a ring. The world that we live in is not 2 + 2 makes 4. It is much, much more than that. Sooner we go back to that great world view that caused our ancestors and ancestresses to do great things, the better it shall be for us and our survival, which is becoming more threatened every day. We must go back to the world, go back to seeing with not only the eyes of our flesh, but also to feeling, man. We have got to feel. When I say feel, I mean, there was once, ma'am, a thing which all white people who lived in Africa for a long time used to call the bush telegraph. The bush telegraph was something which people today would find incredible. For example, if people are living in a certain place and something occurs far away which affects that people, the people in that place will feel that something has happened, something wrong, and they would react to this. In other words, ma'am, telepathy, the thing which people today wrongly ascribe to a supernatural power when in fact it's part of our nature, was an everyday thing. And in many parts of Africa, it still is. People feel, we call this the mother feeling, where you can feel something about to happen, and you can feel something which has happened.
I think people
One does not need to be a prophet or a prophetess to be that. Just to be a feeling human being.
I think people here in the Western culture, I think that's why many of us are questioning things and waking up, because I think everyone senses that on some level, like it's not beyond the scope of our belief system anymore, I think. That's in my world anyway. What other things have you seen yourself that would really sort of challenge our belief system over here?
Honorable lady, Mr. David Icke can tell you that on my left thigh there is a hole into which I can push my thumb 1 inch into my flesh. This is a hole that is causing me a lot of distress. It is a hole that was dug into my flesh in 1950 when I encountered the creatures that white people wrongly call aliens.
Aliens?
Yes, ma'am. These creatures exist. They are there. They are part of the terrible web of our life, of our existence. And we scoff at their presence only at our direst peril. These things exist, and delusions and superstitions do not dig holes in human flesh. Delusions and superstitions do not manipulate people into slaughtering each other. Delusions and superstitions and fantasies do not cause misery decades long in hundreds of human lives. For example, what am I talking about, man? I have stopped traveling by aeroplane. I never again shall put my feet inside a modern airport, ever. Because the thing that is in my thigh, whatever it is, man, and I lack the courage to take a knife and dig it out, that thing causes me great embarrassment. When I go through airport gates, the airport gates start screaming blue murder, man. Even though I'm carrying no metal object. And the culprit, which is messing around with my life, is this hole which is in my leg. I ask with humility, how many other human beings, men and women, white and black, across the broad face of Mother Earth, have got such holes? I know there are thousands, if not millions. What is in this hole? Why does it cause me pain on certain occasions? Why does it upset electronic devices, even in buildings? I enter a building and something screams blue murder. Wah! Catch him, the terrorist. And you feel so embarrassed as everyone looks at you like you are the slimiest thing that ever crawled out of the mud of Africa. This is what I've gone through hundreds of times.
I think one of the points to make here, because what we're talking about kind of connects, is that, again, the UFO, quote, extraterrestrial research field is dominated by European and North American experience. And yet, in Africa, there is an absolute, again, library of stories and experience that people have had, going not just today, but way back, in interacting with non-human entities. And as I talk about in my books, I would strongly suggest that it's these extraterrestrial, interdimensional entities that are manipulating human society, at one level anyway, to cut us off from these higher levels of perception and consciousness that Credo was talking about earlier, so that we become prisoners of the five senses. That's what this malevolent, manipulating force wants. It doesn't want us to be multidimensional, infinite beings, capable of feeling, as Credo puts it, and knowing beyond the five senses. It wants to hold us in five-sense reality. That's why society has been changed dramatically to the point where it is there to hold the five senses in imprisonment. It's there to keep us so focused on smell and touch and hearing and sight and all the rest of it that we switch off from these higher powers that we have and these higher connections that we have. And the thing that really struck me when I first met Credo in the late 90s was how his African stream of knowledge includes the stories and the concept of what he calls the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent, which mirrors exactly my research in other parts of the world about what I call the reptilians. And when you put his knowledge together with my research and other people's research, the common themes are unignorable if we're interested in knowing what's going on instead of defending our belief system.
And I'm assuming now this is sort of along the lines of what we've talked about before, where the solution out of this is to refocus on the true nature of what we are as opposed to getting caught up in focusing on there's something negative trying to take us out, right?
Well, I think the two are equally important. Before people start to get out of jail, they have to realize they're in one. For people, the spiritual and the streetwise, for me, go hand in hand. And it's the nature of the way society has changed and cut us off in so many ways from these other levels of ourselves in terms of, the global media, the television. It dominates our flow of information now. It's all about enticing the five senses. And, people don't smell the roses anymore, not least because the society economically has been structured to make it a weekly, monthly, in some parts of the world, daily, desperate struggle for survival. And when you're in a mode of trying to survive another day, another week, another mortgage payment, you're not going to open yourself to the bigger picture of life and the powers that you have. Your focus is going to be, my goodness me, how do I make the mortgage payment this month? And this is why a society which generates enormous amounts of stress, not just economic stress, but stress in so many endless ways, is holding us in a state of emotional trauma, which is stopping us as a human race increasingly getting into that other level of ourselves, the silence between the thoughts, as I talked about last time, rather than getting caught in the five-sense reality that we think is real but certainly is not. And it's vital that you quite right, Nicole, as well as understanding how we're manipulated, and to some extent what is doing the manipulating and why, we need to open ourselves to these other levels, because without doing that, we'll be in this world and of this world, and this world will control us. If we can be in this world physically, but not of this world in terms of where our point of perception is coming from, then we can connect ourselves again to become infinite beings that we naturally are, rather than be little droplets detached from the ocean, which is what the system wants us to be.
I totally agree with what you're saying. 'Cause, I mean, that's what our whole audience is on the path towards consciousness, is about stepping out and observing, not identifying with, the voice in your head and what's going on. There's another interesting element to this too, though. You're talking about the agenda to keep us in stress, in fear, and the sort of negative side of it. But as you know, I just recently got back from Peru, still trying to figure out what the heck happened to me out in Peru. But one of the things that did happen to our entire group was significant UFO sightings, and I was actually just thinking about that this morning. I mean, I've really come to, over the years of living this and on this path and talking to great people like yourselves and really exploring this and waking up, I've really come to rely on my higher guidance for what's really of a higher energy and what's not. And that interaction with those lights, it was very significant, very dramatic. The entire group saw it repeatedly over several occasions, and it was pretty clear what it was, or at least what it was not. But it was extremely positive. It was an extremely, almost like a glorious, heavenly, higher energy interaction. It wasn't, I don't believe, from a negative place at all. So have either of you had any experiences like that with a higher energy?
I'll let Credo pick that one up.
Credo, have you had any interactions with any beings or UFOs or aliens of a positive nature?
Yes, ma'am. Now, when somebody answers such a question in the affirmative, people will think you are a weirdo. I've been called that kind of nutcase many times by people who are blinded and who do not see. My answer, ma'am, is yes, and yes again. I do not want to be an object of ridicule. But people who know me know, ma'am, one simple truth. I can see into the future. And I do not regard myself, however, as a special creature. I am just a creature who tried to retain the ancient talents which were quite common to his people. Ma'am, my hands can invent. I see things before they happen. Not so long ago, I gave to Mr. David Icke a book, a history book in which I wrote things that were going to happen, and they happened. It's when you try to open the doors of your frightened life to the, what you call, ma'am, the higher forces in the universe. But, ma'am, may I make a warning, please?
Mm-hmm.
Ma'am, if one wants to understand the world in which we live and the entities that share our world and our universe with us, please, we must be careful not to apply human criteria to certain phenomena in the universe. And I speak from experience, ma'am. And I can tell you, to say there are negative people out there and positive ones is sometimes to make the same mistake that caused the Western nations to shockingly misjudge Africa and her people, and to misjudge also people such as Native Americans, Australian Aborigines, and others. We must be very, very careful. Yes, there are miracles out there. Yes, there is knowledge flowing into our minds from out there. Yes, the things that we call UFOs are a real, undeniable fact. And yes, ma'am, there are entities, some of whom look so human, we often mistake them for some of us, who, however, are so afraid of our advance in certain fields of being, that they do everything in their power to suppress us. Just as the Western nations, men, knew who the Africans really were, what the Africans had done, but they deliberately kept that knowledge away, not only from the Africans, but from their own descendants, all the better to dominate and oppress the Africans. For example, far beyond England are islands called the Hebrides, or Hebrides. On those islands are stone circles, and on those stone circles, the people of those islands say that these stone circles, some of quite big size, were erected by black men. But the English people arriving in Africa pretended not to have knowledge of this fact, that in their country, to the northwest of their country, were islands which were once visited by men from Africa. The African was denied his own true identity, just as some alien entities now are denying us the truth about ourselves and our importance in the world, and are pushing us into the quagmire of warfare, of death, of fear, and they are actually blinding us. What am I saying, ma'am? When we were young children, we were being forced to be vaccinated. We had to all to go to the trading store or the local mission station where we were vaccinated. And our grandmothers protested against this, saying that the children were being spiritually blinded. And it turned out to be true. Many African children who were given vaccination against smallpox and other scaremongering diseases which were said to be in the land, these children became spiritually deaf and blind. They no longer saw nature spirits. Only we, whose parents protected us, our mothers used to heat grains of corn, maize, and apply them on our arms to cause blisters, so that when the white officials arrived, they saw these blisters on our arms and assumed we had been vaccinated, when in fact we were not. We were being protected by our parents from being spiritually blinded.
So how did they...
There are entities out there, which fear us not for what we are, but for what we would ultimately be given a chance.
How did the vaccinations, what is in them that's making them cut off from their sort of higher self, their spiritual world?
I do not know, Honorable One, but all I can tell you is that all African children and all African adults who are vaccinated whether for polio or for smallpox or for any other disease, especially a thing called yellow fever, which today you can't travel to certain countries without going through. These people become spiritually affected, man. Another interesting thing, which again affects our people, which was that when you went to a trading store and you bought something that was in the 1930s and the 40s, the shopkeeper used to give you what is called bonsela. These are lumps of colored sugar which were given to children. And our people became addicted to this colored sugar, ma'am. And these people became spiritually blind. I remember in the 1930s we were told not to accept bonsela from the shopkeepers after buying things. We were to accept it, and on going outside into the bush, we were to throw these things away. This spiritually weakening of humankind, man, this feeling of humankind with fear, hatred, unease, and cold, ugly superstition. This is part of a strategy that is being pursued even now by whatever powers that there are. And these powers exist. It may be of interest to Mr. David Icke to know that today, out of anger, I went to a lawyer to seek a lawyer's advice because of something that is being done to me and to other sangomas, healers, who are trying to help our people in the teeth of the AIDS pandemic, which is sweeping through South Africa. Strange things are happening which should be made known by the world and all humanity and not hidden under a blanket. I had to go to seek a lawyer's advice.
Yes. What Credo is talking about here in terms of Africa is encompassing what's actually happening all around the world, where he talks about vaccinations making it much more difficult for people to go into a multidimensional mode. Where he's talking about this sugar being given to children, which had the same effect. We're looking at, on a global level, we're looking at fluoride in the water. We're looking at vaccinations, of course, on a global level. We're looking at aspartame and all these brain rewiring chemicals that are in our food and drink. The absolute bottom line of the manipulators, what they must do to hold us in servitude, is to hold us in five-sense reality and to stop us going into multidimensional mode, into the infinite consciousness that we are, in awareness of that. And therefore we are being bombarded globally in the way that Credo talks about the African experience, so that we find it much more difficult to be who we are, and therefore look into the headlights of the oncoming physical world and think that's all there is. And on the other level that Credo's talking about, in terms of divide and rule, he was telling me some years ago how when the British, what a story there is to tell about the British authorities over the years that have created mayhem on this planet, how when they came into Africa, they would play one tribe off against another. They would start conflict between them. And when one of the tribes was in desperate trouble of survival, they would then say to them, the only way for you to survive is to come under the protection of the British Empire. And the British Empire then took control of another people in another part of Africa. And of course, what's happening globally, and what has been happening for centuries, is that this same practice of playing one group or country off against another, or groups of countries off against another group, is a common technique that is keeping us, again, focused in fighting each other in irrelevant conflict. And while we're focused on that, we're not, again, like being desperate to survive to pay the mortgage, we're focused on something else and not spiritually smelling the roses and hearing the silence and the knowing that is within that silence. So it's all coordinated. And what I would say to people is, in all these different areas where people are challenging the system with various pressure groups and all the rest of it, is to understand that the force they are all challenging is the same one, which is dividing society and structuring it in a way that holds us in spiritual servitude. Because if we're not in that level of servitude, then we won't be in 5 cent servitude. And that's what it's all about. It's all about disconnecting us from the full magnitude of who we are, so we live out our lives in this reality as droplets instead of the ocean. And once we become the ocean, and you're right, Nicole, more and more people are waking up to connect with that and to understand that, the manipulator's power is falling. And one of the things that Credo said to me a few weeks ago when I was with him is that these manipulators, this Chitahuri, whatever name you want to give to it, is starting to panic. And I feel exactly the same. I think we're starting to see phenomena where the agenda for centralized global dictatorship, fundamental to which is this closing us down spiritually, is starting to unravel. And the next few years, while challenging, are going to be a very, very interesting time to be here.
See, again, it's interesting how, you talk to people all over the world and they're all saying the essence of the same thing, but they're all sensing what you're saying. I mean, not all over, as far as the entire population, but more and more people all over the world, different belief systems, they're all sort of saying the same essence.
Well, Credo's had some amazing insights and visions over the years, one of which was predicting the Kennedy assassination before it happened. And the writings that he referred to, which he gave to me, which he wrote, I think, 1999, I think it was, very clearly predicted 9/11 and the situation with Bush and Blair, which was a phenomenal call at the time, because, the whole Bush thing was not, he wasn't even president at the time. And I think, again, that if we can get into that silence, if we can get into those levels of ourselves beyond the 5 sense reality, we can start to enter levels of sensitivity where we can see and sense and know things which in 5 sense mode are denied us.
So, Credo, how is it that you're able to see into the future?
Honorable one, I do not know, but I am not the only one with this curse. I call it a curse, ma'am. Why? Because I've had a lot of trouble in my life because of this gift. I do not like it. I am not proud of it. It has made a total misery of my life. All I do know, ma'am, is that all members of my family, from my mother to my aunt and downwards, we had this gift, and so have other black people in South Africa. We had this gift, but because the Christians don't like it, we hide it. We try to suppress it. In other words, we are helping the enemy all the better to enslave us out of fear. Ma'am, I have had many people, especially white people, boasting about their psychic power. They shouldn't. This power is not a power. It is a horrendous responsibility. It is something that belongs to the past, something that all human beings had. It is not an enjoyable experience, honorable lady. It only shows that this universe in which we are part of is more mysterious than we think, and that whatever happens to us, be it seeing into the future, be it bending spoons or whatever, it is not really something one should preen oneself about. It is showing how the human race has fallen. Once everybody could see into the future, man. Africa is full of prophets and prophetesses who made amazing predictions as recently as 50 years ago. One black woman predicted that one day black men will rule South Africa again. And her predictions were so disturbing to the British Empire that General John Smuts, who was then the Prime Minister of Africa, ordered the arrest of this black woman, Nontetho Bungu. And she was jailed, not in prison, but in a lunatic asylum where she was raped and beaten by real lunatics. And she died. She, this incredible woman, even named South Africa's first black ruler, Mandela. She called him Mandla. And Smuts, who had an obsessive fear of prophets and seers, and who haunted them, who consulted them privately, ordered this woman's condemnation to a living death. Honorable one, I wish that human beings should go back to what they used to be. The fall of man is a fact. We fell from a godly state to a slave state. We fell from people who once sailed the seas in rafts of reeds to people who are frightened of their own shadows. Today, we must go back to that time and understand men should fall no more. Men and women should go back to the days of those human beings who raised great pyramids in Egypt, in Yucatan and in Peru. These were no people from anywhere. They were human beings who used their God-given talents. We should go back to that and stop being amazed at shadows. Africa needs to go back to that time and once more be an angel of peace upon this planet.
I can understand exactly why Credo feels that his powers are a curse, given the experience he's had in his life, because one of the key aims of the empires, not least the British, was when they went into these native societies, whether it was North America with the Native Americans, whether it was Central America, South America, Africa, Australia with the Aborigines, wherever they went, one of their key goals was to destroy the knowledge stream held in those societies. I remember Credo saying to me years ago that when people like the British came in, and Cecil Rhodes, who was a great frontman for the British takeover of Africa, they milked the minds of the shaman and then killed them, which is why the knowledge that Credo has and has retained went underground into a network of secret societies just to keep it alive, because the colonial powers, controlled by this manipulating force that I talk about, wanted to destroy that knowledge. More than that, they are terrified of it. What Credo says about Jan Smuts is true of the force in general. They're terrified of it because it holds the knowledge that can set us free, the knowledge that we're not Credo Mutwa or Nicole or David Icke. We are infinite consciousness expressing itself in this five-sense reality. And to keep us in that imprisoned state, they not only have to fill our food with rubbish and give us the vaccinations and all that stuff, they also have to suppress the knowledge that can alert us to who we really are and the amazing infinite nature of possibility. And that says an amazing thing about us, as Credo indicated earlier when he talked about our godlike state. If we weren't, or we did not have the potential to be that multidimensional, infinite, quote, godlike entity, then they would not have to work so hard to suppress our infinite selves. with all the stuff that they do. And I've used this analogy before, but I think it's a relevant one. If you have a ball and a tank of water, and you put the ball in the tank of water, its natural state is to float on top, just as our natural state is to be infinite, multidimensional beings. To keep that ball in an unnatural state, i.e. at the bottom of the tank, you have to push it down there, and then you have to hold it there. Once you let it go, the pressure to hold it in its unnatural state, it, without any outside influence, is going to go whoop back to its natural state, floating on the top of the tank. And so what symbolically is being done to us, and has been done for a long time, is that we're being bombarded mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually with various forms of suppressant to symbolically hold us in that unnatural state on the bottom of the tank. And this is why it is so important that uncovering and exposing the methods of suppression used to do that to us must go alongside and not be ignored by the other side of this, which is opening ourselves to our natural state, so we go zip to the top of the tank again and become who we really are. Every time I talk to Credo about the African experience, ancient and modern, it is such a microcosm, such an encapsulation of the way that humanity as a whole has been hung out to dry. But I know that we're now in the time when the ball is about to float on the top again. And it's going to be a very, very challenging time as this transformation comes about to do that.
Do you have a list or a recommendation thing put together for what to eat that doesn't have these, as you say, brain-altering chemicals and sort of lifestyle suggestions? Do you have a list?
I'll tell you what I do, and I think you get too obsessive with this. I think we can cope with a certain amount, and the body can process that. What happens is when it gets overwhelmed, it's very much like the immune system, what I call the Norton antivirus in computers. The immune system can cope with a certain amount of situations where the body is being attacked. It can sort that out. That's what it's there to do. It's when it's overwhelmed and overrun that we get in a situation where, we get in serious trouble. What I do, I try to eat non-chemical food as much as I can. And I purify the water, because the water in the taps is horrendous stuff. And I just do what best I can to keep as many chemicals out of my body as possible. And if I can keep it to a certain level, and when you're traveling around, it's impossible to keep it, get rid of it completely, then my body can cope with that. My immune system can sort it. But what's happening, and I cringe when I see it. My son played in a football tournament a few years ago at a local school. And when the little football tournament was going on, they had the school fete, the school, annual, what you would call in America a garage sale was going on. And they had these bottles and bottles of cheap cola. And they were handing them out to the kids, and they were pouring them back and all the rest of it. And I got one of these bottles, and I looked at it, what was in it. And it was just like a chemical formula, this thing. And when you think of the chemicals that are now bombarding our children. Credo talked about the effects of vaccines, that they're being bombarded by those too. It is no wonder, crikey, intelligent life calling planet Earth here, that we are seeing increasing behavior problems among children. It's because they're being poisoned, and their brains are being chemically rewired in a way that's making it difficult for them to express a balanced behavior. And what do we do then? We give them drugs like Ritalin to suppress this imbalanced behavior, which just rewires the brain more, and off we go in this downward spiral. And it's so important that parents, my feeling, that the great problem with the world, if we're talking about delinquency, it's not juvenile delinquency, it's adult delinquency. That's the problem. And most of the delinquents are in government. What we need to do as parents is to protect our children from this chemical onslaught, as well as the indoctrination onslaught, not by imposing our will upon them, but by giving them the information they need to see what is being done to them. Instead of that, I see parents just pouring this rubbish, this poison, down their children and then wondering why their behavior is not what they would like it to be. And I feel for our children all over the world, because there are some incredible children being born now. People give them different names, but who are being able to have the potential to retain this multidimensional state in this reality. And this malevolent force is targeting the children, because they know if they can get the children, then they've seriously got the adults they become, and the whole spiral of manipulation and suppression can therefore continue. And we need to protect them from what's being done to them.
Okay, let's talk about the throwing the bones. You mentioned that was quite a significant event, David.
Well, it was extraordinary. I mean, I've had tarot cards done, and in my research, I've got an open mind, and I try everything. I've got a philosophy, try it once, and if you don't like it, don't do it again. If you do like it, do it as often as you like, so long as you don't impose it on anyone else. I think that's a philosophy we can live with, in harmony myself. But the bones, when Credo threw them, obviously it reminded me of the runestones and all that, but there was just an energy about them, because they just have a fantastic history. But the way he read them, I mean, to me, they were a pile of bones beautifully carved on the floor, how they fell. But then Credo started reading them, and he was just extraordinarily accurate. What to me was a pile of beautifully carved bones, to him was a storybook, and it was just incredible.
So how does it work, Credo, with the bones? How does it work?
Honorable one, I do not know, and I would not claim to know. All I do know is that the throwing of the bones actually works. All one has to do is to, I don't know the English word, you must go deep into what we call the silent valley. The silent valley is a part of the human mind or brain or body, I'm not sure which, where there is a God power residing in every human being. You must go into this silent cave, as we call it, where all fear, all anxiety is banished, and where you are alone with this golden silence, and you see up, down, sideways, where the future and the past and the present come together like lovers, and all is just not tomorrow or yesterday, but all is eternity. It's a state I can't describe, ma'am. What I can only call the golden cave, where you are one with all the stars, all the worlds, the future, the past, and everything. Then you see that when the objects that you are throwing fall down, and they talk to you. This is how it works. And ma'am, when even now there are Christian priests in South Africa, especially those of the Rema Church, who tell our children not to listen to what we, the bone throwers, do, because these, they say, are Satan's things. And not even to drink the herbal medicines that we prepare, because these are the devil's concoctions. Honorable one, the battle against the hidden knowledge, the God knowledge in all of us, goes on even now. One, the words that Mr. David Icke has just said, ma'am, made me cry, because something is happening in Southern Africa which should be investigated by all human beings who care about humanity, its sanctity and its importance in the universe. In South Africa has been brought a kind of corn, maize, called genetically GM, genetically modified or some such thing. This maize, man, is highly poisonous. It makes human beings very aggressive. It is the basic ingredient of junk food which our children are compelled to eat. And because certain African governments have rejected this genetically modified food, what is being done now? South African farmers are planting this maize, and they put pamphlets on their maize fields which state in Afrikaans, Des Mos Mielies. Des Mos Mielies. It is just maize. But maize was a foodstuff that came not from Africa, but from America. It was brought by the slave raiders to Africa. It made people huge, big, massive, but dull-witted and extremely aggressive and cruel. Some of the most aggressive tribes in Africa, my own people, the Zulus, became very warlike because they adopted this alien grain as their staple food. Now, in the battle against AIDS that we are waging, we, the last true healers in South Africa, we say our patients should not eat maize. They should rather go back to eating millet, which is the oldest grain known to humankind in all Africa, and barley. And given these ancient grains, patients with AIDS improve rapidly. They gain weight, they become passive and not agitated and full of self-pity and self-hatred. You know, ma'am, this poisoning of humankind goes on even now. It reaches ridiculous lengths. I am a painter of pictures, and I am the only black person in all South Africa who casts his own works in metal. But do you know that I am not allowed to sell any of my pictures or any of my metal work? Because I portray things that it appears as if certain powers do not want to be portrayed. And I'm not the only African artist or writer who will die poor. There have been several. That the ongoing war against what we call the winged human mind, the ancient knowledge, is still going on now. People are being killed. My aunt is gone, 104 years old lady. My wife Cecilia is gone. She died with a mysterious needle driven into her uterus in a hospital not far from Johannesburg. And my sister, Mary Mutwa, is dead. I was told a falsehood that she had rolled in a car accident, but there was no car near where her corpse was found. Why? Mary protested against a crime which is being committed by the Catholic Church everywhere in Africa even now. The Catholic Church discourages safe sex being practiced by Africans. And my sister protested against this. She said, but our people are getting finished. We are burying 40 young people every weekend. what's going on? Why does the Catholic Church allow all this carnage? And she paid for it with her life. There is a real war going on, Mr. David Icke. I wish that this war could be exposed in all its ghastliness. Real people are dying. My son, my wife, my sister. And I feel angry, sir. How can people be so blind as not to realize that there are hostile alien entities at large in our country, masquerading as human beings?
David?
Well, just hearing Credo talk there, I mean, every subject he brings...
David?
Well, just hearing Credo talk there, I mean, every subject he brings up connects into everything else. I mean, first of all, the universal knowledge. Nicole talked a few weeks ago about the nature of reality, and I was talking about the silence between the thoughts is who we really are, and here's Credo talking about the silent cave, the golden cave, where he goes to see beyond what most people can see. It's wherever you go, you have this universal recurring theme. Well, why wouldn't it be when it's the truth? But what Credo was saying about GM food, I was fascinated what he said about maize particularly. The more research I do on DNA is interchangeable. DNA affects DNA. And as I've been saying for years in the books and the talks, that GM food is designed to genetically modify us and make it again the same theme, more difficult for us to manifest the true nature of who we are, because they're playing with our DNA as well. And in terms of what's happening in Africa with AIDS, there's no doubt, and has not been any for me for many years in my research, that for some reason, and Credo may have some answers to this, they are targeting black people, particularly in Africa. When you read that document, which was put together by the Project for the New American Century, the neocon, I would say fascist grouping in America that is behind the Bush administration, when you read its agenda, it is just like reading the history of the last, 5 years since Bush came to power, or 4 years with he came to power in early 2001, because he is following that agenda. It talks about the need to invade Iraq. It talks about the countries of Iraq, North Korea, and Iran, which became known in the Bush administration, of course, as the axis of evil. You follow this document, and you follow the course of what is happening now. Now, also in that document, it talks about developing chemical weapons that target, quote, specific genotypes. And that is what they're doing. And they are targeting black people in Africa with this thing that's called AIDS, whatever it actually is. Because what is AIDS? AIDS is not a phenomena in itself. You don't die of AIDS. You die of the diseases that a shattered, defeated, devastated immune system cannot stop. That's why they keep talking about they died of AIDS-related diseases. He died because his immune system was shot. And this phenomenon we call AIDS is a concentrated, calculated attack on the human, and in Africa overwhelmingly, the black immune system. And instead of producing these, again, chemical drugs which further undermine the immune system, like AZT, we need to go down the road of boosting the immune system. Instead of looking for the solution, find the cause and remove that. And the cause is a shattered immune system. And Credo has developed a herbal remedy, if that's what you call it, for this situation with AIDS, which has proved to be incredibly successful. But again, it's difficult for him to do what he needs to do with it, because the people in power do not want the solution to the problem that they have implemented. So it's not that, we're faced with all these insurmountable natural problems and natural disasters. We are faced with a series of calculated, manipulated, coldly planned quote, disasters and problems. And if we can remove that which is causing them, that which is creating them, then by nature, what they are creating will go away. Which is, again, I must emphasize this, I'm getting tired of hearing people who say they're coming from the spiritual direction, and I do understand that and I respect that, who are in complete denial of what is actually happening on the planet, to the point where they don't want to know about the things that aren't very pleasant. Now, you know, for me, the real spirituality is not running away from that we don't like, from that we don't want to face. It's running straight at it, and it's infusing that spirituality, that unquestioning courage, if that's the word, that comes from that spirituality, and therefore remove what is denying and suppressing the spirituality of everyone else, instead of floating on a cloud, going round in a holding pattern above the airport, refusing to land, and actually get involved in changing the world instead of escaping from it. Just my view.
And by changing, I mean, you're talking about holding the higher consciousness in the midst of, as opposed to just simply fighting and being in resistance?
Well, fighting it's no good, because what the Matrix wants, this illusory manipulated reality, it wants us to fight, because it takes two to fight. You know, as someone said in the 60s, what if we had a war and no one turned up? There'd be no war. It's not about fighting it. It's about removing the cause of it. And, you know, it's like in the days of Gandhi, his philosophy was non-violent, non-cooperation with the system. See, the system only works because we cooperate with it. We, every day, put the bricks and the mortar together for our own prison. You know, if we would not touch the aspartame-ridden soft drinks, if we wouldn't buy them for our children, if we wouldn't drink them ourselves, if we refused to touch genetically modified food, if we refused to support and take part in wars of conquest, which are not about setting anyone free, but by further imprisoning them, then there would be no wars of conquest. George Bush and Tony Blair are not in Iraq fighting in the streets of Baghdad. They're in their offices swigging whiskey or whatever. You know, I have this, a solution to wars, certainly modern wars. We have a law that anyone that declares war has to fight in the front line from day one. End of wars. George Bush had been in the front line in Iraq when the first bullet was fired. He would have been under a bed in Houston when the second one went off. So we are cooperating with our own imprisonment. We stop that. We stop the imprisonment. This is why divide and rule is so vital to these people, so that we do not have the unity of purpose, the unity of perception, which allows us to see that we are our own prison warders. And therefore, if we didn't buy this rubbish food, the corporations producing it couldn't produce it because they'd have no one to sell it to. This is the solution. We don't have to hang Henry Kissinger or George Bush and all this stuff. We just have to stop cooperating with their system, and their system will fall. The fact that we're divided and ruled that allows it to continue.
We've gone a little bit over time, but I want to sort of open the floor up for Credo next to, you're addressing, people that are questioning, seeking, waking up around the world right now. Our audience is in at least 93 countries on the web. And if you had, what is the most important message for you to get out to them today?
Ma'am, you mean me, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Honorable Madam Nicole, I am a Sanusi, and this means I do not have the right to dictate to people what they must do and what they must not do. I can only sit at the gate of human sense and sensibility. I say to all the world, my brothers and sisters, whether you are white or black or brown, we are in great danger. Too many people, as Mr. David Icke says, and these words could not be more true, they should be written into stone. We human beings are blinded. We human beings refuse to see certain things, and we are conditioned not to see others. For example, the conspiracy is not simply a dream in the minds of deranged people. It is a fact. I never believed that there was such a thing myself. I used to think, it is just white people talking. But now, I myself am a victim of this. Honorable one, look at what's happening in the world. Look at India and look at Africa. India underwent the same trauma of colonization and attempted spiritual destruction that Africa went through. However, India today has recovered her dignity as a people and as a nation. And for some reason which I cannot really fathom, even in my darkest hours, India has been allowed, I say allowed, to possess nuclear weapons. India has been allowed, I say allowed, to possess huge iron works. There is even an Indian gentleman whom I saw in a picture not so long ago. He works steel on a massive scale. But Africa, whose mind is the same as that of the Indian people, Africa is sinking in senseless wars that end nowhere. And if you know the black man, you can see clearly that these wars are engineered from outside. They gain no one anything. And today, I see another great danger for Africa. There is now talk emanating from the West that terrorists have now entered Africa. In other words, Africa is the next country that's going to suffer massive bombardment from the air by the forces of the United States. Africa is the next target of an open neo-colonization where Africa's people will be wiped off the face of the earth with the three things that Bertrand Russell wrote about almost 100 years ago, that the Western nations should allow war, famine, and disease to decimate the so-called lower races, meaning us. In other words, what we are seeing now is that Africa is going to be sterilized of her human beings through wars for which the Africans themselves will carry the blame, and through diseases for which again the Africans are carrying the blame. And yet these wars and this famine and this disease come from outside. We must accept that we stand on the precipice of mortal danger. Amongst people who talk to me are black diplomats who tell me that in some parts of Africa there is more oil underground than there is in the entire Middle East. Also here in South Africa, there is a metal whose price never goes down, a metal which carries in its hands the future of all the oil producing nations of the Middle East. That metal is platinum. And Africa is going to be destroyed for platinum and for the oil under her mountains and plains. And I, as an African, who have already lost my children, I weep tears which will be wiped off my eyes by nobody. We are dying. We are being destroyed. A brutal, cynical, and uncaring enemy has declared war upon us. We are being killed by aid and by wars which we ourselves cause. And I appeal, please, look at the truth. Don't go into denial, my brothers and sisters. Whole nations are being decimated in front of you. Open your eyes. Do not let the children of the reptile to blinden you with their venom. Open your eyes. That's all I can say. There is hope. We can win, but open your eyes, please.
Final thoughts, David?
Well, Africa has not just been forgotten in terms of its knowledge, it's been forgotten in terms of its suffering. And I must say, when I see, as has happened in Europe in the last few weeks and days, Tony Blair, the man who was one of the architects and certainly one of the great manipulators of the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and what have you, he has now said that his desire, his passion, to save Africa. And when Tony Blair says he wants to save Africa, because when these people speak, you just reverse what they say and you get what they're saying, it means he is wanting to destroy it or finish it off. And Africa is a phenomenal continent in terms of its so-called natural resources and also in terms of its knowledge. And these guys want it. They want to destroy one and they want to profit from another. And Africa has been forgotten for far too long. It is fundamental to this whole story, and it's about time people realized it.
And the solution? The
solution is people waking up, and that's waking up spiritually, as we've talked about, but it's also waking up in the five sense level, in terms of, mentally waking up and seeing what is actually happening. It's like a veil, and a lot of that veil is denial. It's denial. You just don't want to look at it. It's a collective version of shut up, don't want to talk about it, change the subject, okay? That's what's going on. And at the same time, of course, knowledge, information of what is happening is also being suppressed to keep that ignorance perpetuated. So what we need to do is a number of things. We need to take responsibility for what's happening in the world, therefore get informed. We need to get information out through the many channels as we can to get round the suppression of the mainstream media. And we need to wake up from our slumber, from our hypnotic state, which we've been put into. And these things go hand in hand together. And that's what people like me and you and Credo and so many more are now trying to do. And, I'm very optimistic. So I'm under no illusions of the challenges that faces in this period of transition, when the prison warders, i.e. us in the end, that's what we're manipulated to be, our own prison warders, hand over the keys to the true nature of who we are. And it's a great challenge, but it's going to be a very interesting time, because we're going to see some incredible changes and some incredible events. Some of them very unpleasant, and some of them incredibly inspirational.
Well, I hope we've done something to get the word out and start the process here today. So I really want to thank both of you very much for being with us on News for the Soul.
Pleasure, Nicole.
And thank you, Credo.
Thank you,
Thank you very much. So we can find more on davidike.com. Go there. Credo, do you have a website by any chance?
No, ma'am, I don't know how a website looks like.
I'll just say this, any gems from Credo and any information Credo would like to get out will always be on davidike.com. So,
perfect.
Credo is just an incredible man, and his knowledge is just extraordinary, and he needs to be heard on as big a level as possible.
Perhaps we can do it again.
Yeah, that would be great.
Amen to that, ma'am.
Oh, wonderful. Let's do that then. And in the meantime, all the best.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you, Credo. I tell you, I thought that was so powerful, Nicole, that interview.
I think so.
It really was.
I really felt it.
People are going to be blown away by that, I think.
Yeah.
I could feel it. It had an energy about it, which was really... And the longer it went, the more powerful it got.
I could feel it, too. I could feel it, yeah. This is why we've been brought together.
Exactly.